Hey guys, today we are making Swiss meringue. I'm sharing my 4 crucial tips to make perfect Swiss meringue, and also I'm sharing 4 different types of Swiss meringue with different amount of sugars and also with different temperatures, and see how they make differences, because there are many recipes with different amount of sugars and also with different temperatures, and it was kind of confusing to me at the very beginning, and I know that there are some of you who may feel a little bit confused, so I want to break it down as easily as possible so that you can pick your favorite ratio or recipe for your specific dessert. Alright, so first I'm going to use this recipe to show you how to make it, sharing my 4 crucial tips. For this one, I'm using 150 gram of egg whites and 225 gram of granulated sugar. So the sugar is 1.5 times more amount of egg white. But before we start heating, I have my first tip, which is no oil or excess liquids in the bowl or in egg white. They prevent egg white from whipping up really well, and your meringue can be more loose. If you keep the heat on over mixing, it has to be really gentle heat like this. Which brings my second tip, which is use gentle heat and mix constantly over heating. This is all because you do not want to cook up your meringue partially with heat from the bottom. You want to heat it gentle and evenly to prevent this. Let's heat up until it's 160 Fahrenheit, which is 71 Celsius. And my third tip is to heat up enough, specifically between 122 Fahrenheit to 160 Fahrenheit. So the range is very wide, and it really depends on how much sugar you're using compared to egg whites, and also how stiff you want it to be, and some other factors. So I'm explaining more in details about this as I go. So once it reaches to the temperature, immediately remove from the heat and quickly start whipping with high speed. And that is my fourth tip. Keep whipping with high speed until it cools down enough. If you keep whipping with low speed, for example, your meringue gets much more loose than the one you whip with high speed. When it's almost done, you can add flavors like vanilla extract. Today, I added vanilla beans. To check if it's done, I always touch the bowl. When it is gently warm, it is done. When you touch your meringue directly with your finger, it should be very slightly warm. This meringue is very fluffy, thick and shiny. It is not too sweet, and it is easy to pipe and hold the shape pretty well. As an additional tip, if you want to pipe it or use for something, do that as soon as it is done while the condition is still good. As it sits longer, it slowly starts separating, and it's going to be more difficult to pipe beautifully. So today I piped very small like this and baked with 200 Fahrenheit for about 1.5 to 2 hours. Touch the surface, and it is done when it's not sticky or soft. This is how it looks like after about 15 minutes or so. Okay, so now I want to compare this recipe and my first recipe. For this one, I'll use the exact same amount of sugar and egg whites, but I will heat up to much lower temperature, which is 130 Fahrenheit, which is 54 Celsius, and see how the temperatures affect the result. So for everything else, I did the exact same way to get the accurate result. And here is what we got. You can see that compared to the first one with 160 Fahrenheit, it is more loose. So it is still shiny, smooth, and thick enough to hold the shape, but it was definitely softer. So if you do not want very thick meringue, you can reduce the temperature. But I do understand that thinking about bacteria like salmonella, you want to heat up enough with high speed, which I'll also talk about it later. So stay tuned. Alright, so let's move on to the next experiment. I'm going to use the equal amount of sugar and egg whites this time. So I did 150 gram of sugar and 150 gram of egg whites. And I'll do exact same way as before, except this time I heated up to 150 Fahrenheit. So as you can see, it was very fluffy and light, but the texture was very rough. It was almost like very stiff whipped cream. As I tasted it, I could see that some of the proteins inside was coagulated partially. It was not that smooth, so that means when you use less sugar, the egg whites get cooked up more easily. So unless you want this texture somehow, I recommend to lower the temperature when you use the equal amount of sugar and egg whites. And I'm sharing my last recipe. Specifically, I want to compare this with my third one. For this, I'll use the double amount of sugar. So it is 150 grams of egg whites and 300 grams of sugar. And I'll heat up with 150 Fahrenheit again and see how the increased amount of sugar affects the result. So here's how it looks. As you can see, even though the third one and this one was heated up to the same temperature, the texture is very different. This one was most shiny and dense. It is thick, but also kind of elastic and stretchy as well. So this experiment shows that by adding more sugar, you can heat up to higher temperature without cooking egg whites too much. And it'll also be shinier, heavier, and more stable with more sugar. For me, it is a little bit too sweet, but it's totally up to you and what kind of desserts it's used for. And here are the meringue cookies I baked. I wanted to compare the textures as well. So this is the one with 1.5 times amount of sugar heated up to 160 Fahrenheit. It was nice and crunchy. And this is the one with 1.5 times amount of sugar heated up to 130 Fahrenheit. For me, it was not the huge difference with the first one, but I felt this one was a little bit more crunchy and harder. This one is with equal amount of sugar and egg whites heated up to 150 Fahrenheit. It was good, very light, and almost felt like I'm eating sweet rice puff. And this last one is with the double amount of sugar heated up to 150 Fahrenheit. A little bit too dense and hard for me personally. So before we end, I want to quickly summarize everything I said and also add some more additional tips to give you a better understanding because I talked a lot. So to sum up, the sugar amount should be between 1 time to double amount of egg white, and you can pick between the range. Personally, I do not recommend to add more or less sugar than that to get the better result. When you use less sugar, the meringue gets softer, and when you use more sugar, it gets more shinier, dense, and heavier. So you can adjust as you like. Also, the temperature is very huge factor for the result. It can be between 122 Fahrenheit to 160 Fahrenheit, which is 50 Celsius to 71 Celsius. Depending on the recipes of chefs, they like to use different temperatures. When the temperature is lower, the meringue gets softer and more loose. And when the temperature is higher, it gets more stiff and stable. Also, I want to talk about 2 other important things to decide the temperature, which is egg whites coagulation and salmonella or other bacteria. Egg white coagulation slowly starts from around 140 Fahrenheit and your egg whites completely coagulate at 176 Fahrenheit. And by adding more sugar, you can kind of slower the process. So when you add less sugar, you see more coagulation just like you saw at the ARIA experiment. Also, we want to think about salmonella or other bacteria. To kill the bacteria, it's better to heat with higher temperatures. For example, with 140 Fahrenheit, you need to heat up for about 5 to 10 minutes, and with 160 Fahrenheit, you need to heat up for about 10 seconds at least. So that is why a lot of people like to heat up Swiss meringue up to 160 Fahrenheit. You may be able to heat up with more than 160 Fahrenheit, but just know that the chance of cooking up your egg whites get higher as well. So for that reason, when you choose not to heat up your egg whites with enough temperature for a certain time, unless you really trust the freshness and quality of the eggs, I would suggest to use it for desserts that you bake after that, such as macarons, meringue cookies, and so on. On the contrary, with a lot more sugar, you can heat up egg whites with higher temperature for food safety, and they can still remain smooth and shiny. So you can use it for desserts that you do not need to bake after that, such as Swiss buttercream. So in the end, you can pick the amount of sugar and temperature depending on what type of texture you want. If you have your favorite recipe already, you can use that without testing a lot of times, of course, but I think just knowing those things can help you understand better about Swiss meringue and why the pastry chefs pick the different combinations of sugar and temperature. So what combination do I personally like? It depends on what kind of desserts, of course, but if I need to pick one that works for a lot of kind of desserts, I will pick my first recipe, which is 1 time of egg whites and 1.5 times of granulated sugar, and heat up to 160 Fahrenheit. That meringue is not too sweet at all, and it is safe to use for non-baked desserts and also create good texture as baked desserts as well. It is very fluffy, smooth, shiny. It took all the pros of both sides, and it's a neutral, almighty Swiss meringue. By the way, this is solely my opinion from my experience, so some other pastry chefs probably would say slightly different things, but it is my conclusion for now.
Crazy, the kinds of things life throws at you. I never knew I'd be so safe in your arms. Now you're all
Very yummy, right? It's like banana pie, banana chocolate pie. Oh.
Spider!
Uh-oh.
as fast as the seasons change. My heart was stolen, parts of me that were broken found love, and all the distance can change how I'm feeling, 'cause I know this is real.
Good. Yeah.
I'm so happy that you're mine. Sun can shine.